So contract to close, ensuring a smooth real estate transaction. So we've gotten that offer accepted. We have that listing under contract. Now what? What should we check for? We have many steps we have to go through in the process, but there's certain ones that we need to make sure we don't skim through. We need to be very, very detailed on. So the first slide, it's understanding the contract. This is so important. I can't tell you how many times there's a counter offer or a last minute initial on a contract, and the realtor on one of the sides doesn't really understand what the change was. And it's so important before you send off a document to your buyer or your seller, make sure you understand it. Understand what is being offered, what is being presented to your client. And more than anything, if you have a counter offer, which is where the problem is usually, make sure you understand the terms of the counter before you present it to that buyer or that seller and have them initial. You want to make sure you understand everything in the contract inside out, all the terms, before you send it off for initials or signatures from your client. It'll make the process so much easier. My best advice is if you don't understand something, whether it's the terms or what that buyer is countering exactly, you know, they wrote in a line that you've never heard before or seen before, go ahead and ask the other agent first. Say, hey, I see you wrote this in. What are you meaning by this? You know, talk it out. And then if it's something technical as to the terms that you don't understand, go to your broker and ask, listen, I have this question on page such and such, this line, make sure. Definitely make sure, very important, that all parties have signed and initialed throughout. It has happened. I've had colleagues that have had one missing initial. And due to that, the buyer has been able to cancel later on because guess what? We didn't have an executed contract, guys. If there's one missing initial or one missing signature, the buyer, the seller can go back at any time and simply say, hey, listen, we don't have an executed contract. We don't have an executed contract. And that's their passport out of the transaction. And you don't want that. You have the contract in your hands. You want to do all you can to make it happen. So definitely ensure everyone has signed an initial throughout. The next step, double check the dates and the deadlines. This is so important. Not only is it important to check the deadlines, of course, for the escrow and the inspection, very important, but the loan approval. I can't tell you how important it is, especially if you're on the buyer side. Very important, before you write up that offer, call your buyer's lender and ask them, hey, how much time do you need to provide us an approval? Because I'm preparing the offer and I need to write in how many days. The standard, if you leave it blank, it's automatically 30 days by default. But if the lender tells you, listen, this property has XYZ issue, the buyer has XYZ issue that I'm dealing with, the buyer still owes me this document, and pending on that, I can tell you, and I'm gonna need 40 days, now's the time for you to know, at offer time. You wanna write that in. That is the most important thing to protect your buyer, and that's on our as-is contract. You're always gonna see it on page 2, line 89. Very important, the approval, the financing contingency. I'll go into it more in another slide, but definitely that is the key deadline here, especially when you're on the buyer side, okay? You wanna make sure you have confirmed that with the lender and you have put the suffice amount of time in that finance contingency, okay? Next point, verify contract addenda and disclosures are complete. This is so important. Do you know that your addendums, whether it's a condo disclosure or a lead-based disclosure, they are part of your contract. So if they're not executed, guess what? They can come back, whether it's the buyer or the seller, and say, hey, we don't have an executed contract because I see that at the end of my sales contract, these two addendums were checked off, but they're not signed, or they're missing one signature, or they're missing one initial. So very important that any addendums that are part of this contract in particular are completely filled out, initialed, and signed. That goes with all of your addendums, whether it's a condo disclosure form, an FHA disclosure, a lead-based. Very important that your forms have all initials, signatures, and dates. All right. Hold on. Okay, here we go. The next slide, opening escrow and earnest money. Very important, the day that contract gets executed, you want to immediately submit it to your title company or closing attorney, and of course the buyer's lender. But you want to make sure that title company has the contract the moment it's executed, because when the buyer shows up at the title company or the closing attorney's office, they need to be informed of what contract they're coming in to bring deposit for. So that's very important. You definitely want to follow up with the buyer or with the buyer's agent if you're on the listing side. Make sure that that buyer did turn in the escrow in time and that you have your escrow letter in the file. Very important. Again, that's another item that can have you with a contract in hand that is no longer valid. You need to make sure that that buyer turns in the deposit by when it's due. Usually, typically, we have a 3-day period, but it all depends on what the transaction, what you came to an agreement with, on page 1 of the contract. Stick to it. Make sure your buyer delivers in time. Okay. I put on there, make sure it's documented properly. That's your escrow letter that you're going to ask your title company for, definitely. Let me see. Oh, I think it took me to the next page. Okay, beautiful. See, PowerPoint even knows what I'm thinking about. So our next slide says financing and appraisal contingencies. So important. So when the buyer is purchasing with a mortgage, doesn't matter if it's a conventional loan, VA, FHA, whatever program, you need to make sure you stand by that approval deadline, which I mentioned earlier. It is so important. On page 2 of your as is, line 89, whatever the deadline is for the buyer's approval, you need to make sure the buyer, if you're on the buyer's side, if you're the buyer's agent, make sure you deliver that approval letter in time so that your buyer is protected in case the home doesn't appraise, in case after inspection period is over, your buyer loses their job, their boss denies them overtime, something happens that they were counting on. Guess what? If your lender, your buyer's lender, submitted that approval in time within the deadline, the financing period deadline, your buyer now only needs to turn to their loan officer and say, hey, I can't move forward. This happened. And the loan officer knows what to do and how to proceed. And your buyer is protected. So that's very important. Okay. Definitely, this is a no-brainer. Follow up with the lender. Obviously, whether you're the listing agent or you're the buyer's agent, you want to know where the lender is at in the process. Has the appraisal been ordered? When is the appraiser coming out? Do we have the appraisal report? The sooner you find out what the appraisal came in at and deal with any shortfalls, the better. You don't want to be negotiating sales price a week before closing. It's best that your buyer goes under contract, or your seller, once they go under contract, you want inspections done immediately, followed by appraisal. That way you can tackle any issues head on and have time to make it to closing without needing an extension. The longer you wait to deal with the issues at inspection time and at appraisal, the more you're exposed to needing an extension for this transaction. Okay, so that's very important. You want to make sure, if you're on the buyer side, that the buyer is meeting all the lender's conditions. What do I mean by that? If the lender, obviously, if you're the buyer's agent, the lender might call you and say, hey, listen, your buyer's not answering the phone and they owe me 2 pay stubs. You need to make sure you call that buyer and tell them, hey, please go ahead and get with the lender. They need these pay stubs to proceed. Follow up, follow up. Don't count on just the lender. You need to follow up. Remember, these loan officers are working many loans at a time, and they're not responsible for your buyer not responding the phone or calling them back, texting back, etc. The next slide talks about inspections and repairs. Like I mentioned earlier, the inspections, you definitely want them to take place as soon as possible. I personally push to have my contracts not have an inspection period any longer than 7 days. I have a couple of inspectors that I always offer the recommendation when I'm on the buyer side that I know come out, do the inspection, and give my buyer their full report within an hour or two. That's what you want. You want to tackle this head on, because guess what? If the buyer is not happy with the condition of the home, you need to get on it immediately and decide, Mr. Buyer, do you want me to ask the seller for these repairs, or do you just not want to move forward? And you have to tackle this head on. If there's repairs involved, guess what? The sooner you make an agreement with that seller on who's doing the repairs and what repairs are done and which ones aren't, the better. The less chance you have of needing an extension on this and closing in time. So definitely, you don't want to negotiate repairs 10 days, 15 days into the contract, please. So next bullet point, review inspection reports carefully, definitely. I always tell the buyer when I'm on the buyer side, have you reviewed the report? Okay, you're telling me you want to move forward. You did review it. Do you have any questions? And honestly, if they tell me they have questions, I tell them refer back to the inspector, because I don't know about you, but I don't know about construction. I leave the job to each person. The inspector knows why he noted a problem with plumbing, why he noted a problem with the breakers. You refer it back to the inspector. Your job is just to make sure that they understood the report and that they do indeed want to move forward. That's all you want to clarify. Negotiating repairs, we spoke about that. I spoke about that. Basically, negotiate repairs early on. The earlier, the better. If you come to an agreement with the seller and at some point on certain transactions, which I don't recommend it. If you're on the buyer side and you come to an agreement with the seller, which I have seen, where the seller tells you, you know what, get the repairs done. Tell your buyer to hire the plumber, whatever, and I'll pay for it. Make sure that everything is documented. Make sure you have all those receipts. Do I recommend that type of agreement? I would see it as a last resort. You want the seller to handle any repairs because that is still their property. And God forbid your buyer's plumber goes in there and by mistake breaks something, busts a pipe, whatever happens, extracurricular that you weren't expecting, then you have another problem to deal with. You don't want that. You want whatever repairs are going to be done to be handled by the seller, or Mr. Seller, please give my buyer a credit. Easy peasy. The less you complicate things, the better. You're aiming for a smooth transaction and getting to closing day. Next slide talks about title and HOAs, homeowners associations. Very important if your buyer is purchasing a property that is part of a homeowners association or a condo association. You want that buyer to have the information as to the fees to apply for approval and who to apply with and where to go early on. They should have it, honestly, the day they went under contract or the day after at most, okay? Definitely great, whether you're on the listing side or the buyer's agent side, to go ahead and remind the buyer's agent or your buyer, hey, has the buyer applied with the homeowners association? You don't want them applying 15 days into the contract, because some of these HOAs take 30 days to approve the buyer. So you want them to apply as soon as the inspection period is over, 7, 8 days into the contract at most, and get that application going. As far as title search, you want to make sure that you follow up with your title company, the title company working the transaction, and make sure title search and title commitment have come back. And once they come back, you want to follow up. Hey, has it come in? Has it come in? Once they tell you it's come in, you want to make sure there's no outstanding liens or title defects. Those are the two things you want to check on early in the transaction with with the title company involved. Why? Guess what? If there's an open permit, more than likely, depending on what it is, you're going to have that seller take care of it. And that takes time. So the earlier on you take care of whatever title defects or outstanding liens come up, the better. Properties and HOAs. Sometimes the title company is going to tell you, oh, they have an outstanding lien from the association. A lot of times you call those associations, and once you tell them you're going to sell and you have this person, the seller, under contract, they'll negotiate it, and they'll even agree to a new balance, and you close. But you need to tackle all that early on. So definitely, word of advice, review the title commitment with the title company and address any issues early on. What you want to definitely make sure of is tackle those outstanding liens and title defects early on. The next slide, I can't tell you how important it is to have a final walkthrough and be prepared for your closing. What happens? If you agreed to a repair or a modification of any sort to be done before closing, the walkthrough is it. That is when the buyer is going to confirm that this seller had that repair done or that modification done. Very important. If you're on the buyer side especially, you do not want to skip the walkthrough for any reason. I don't care how nice Mr. Seller is, etc. You want to show up and see that home the morning of the closing or the night before. Usually, let's say you're closing in the morning, your closing scheduled for 9 a.m. Tell the listing agent, hey, can we do the walkthrough for 4, 5, 6 p.m. the day before? And go and take your buyer. It takes a walkthrough. If everything's good, it's not going to take you more than half an hour. You're walking through the house, you're making sure there's no furniture left, no boxes, nothing new pops up that you didn't expect, and especially if you agreed to any modifications or repairs of any sort. Now, when should you schedule the walkthrough? You should definitely schedule the walkthrough once the title company has contacted you all and said, we have received figures from the lender, we have a clear to close, and we have closing documents ready. We are ready to schedule. You don't want to schedule the walkthrough a week before closing. You want to take care of it the morning of or the night before, the afternoon before. So don't schedule the walkthrough until it's for sure, until you have a scheduled time where that seller and buyer are going to sign. So definitely wait for that clear to close to come in, wait for that email or call from the title company stating closing docs are ready, and then schedule that walkthrough and go through with it. In the walkthrough, you want to confirm any repairs you had agreed to along the way are completed, and you want to ensure that the house is in the condition that you guys agreed on. Every home is different. I don't have to tell you. Sometimes a seller and buyer will come to an agreement of buyer staying with the dining room set. Other times it's the opposite. The seller wants to leave furniture and the buyer has been blunt on, I don't want it, I don't want it. And then a walkthrough time comes and lo and behold, the furniture's there. So there's many reasons why you need that walkthrough. Okay. All right. The next slide. Closing day, our favorite day. I call my title company my happy place. A closing day should always be a happy day where you've already crossed your T's, dotted your I's, and you're just there to hold your seller or your buyer's hand, congratulate them, give them a little basket maybe. So how do you ensure it's nice and smooth? Now that you had your walkthrough and it went great, you have to make sure before you show up at the title company, you have to make sure that your seller and buyer are bringing over any required documents. What might be required? Well, your buyer, for example, if they had to obtain an approval from the homeowners association, make note that many title companies will ask the buyer to bring in an original approval letter. So you want to remind, if you're the buyer's agent, you want to remind the buyer, hey, bring that original of your approval letter from the homeowners association with you. You want to take it with you tomorrow to closing, remind them. Make sure, I know it sounds silly, I did have a seller once show up at closing without his ID. And I told him, didn't you drive here? Oh yeah, but I forgot. So, lesson learned. Now don't I only remind my clients the day before, hey, you've been scheduled tomorrow, remember to take your IDs. And doesn't my title company do it as well? But the morning of, if we're on the way to the walkthrough or we're just gonna meet there, I send them a little reminder. Remember you have your IDs. And if for the seller in this case, I also remind them, remember to bring a voided check or your account information with you. Remind them. You never know. Things happen and then they show up without it. Sorry, I have a cold and this coughing. You want to review the closing disclosure, whether you're on the buyer side or the seller side, before going to closing. Address all the questions prior. Have the lender talk to the buyer about any questions the buyer might have in regards to the closing disclosure. Now, to verify transfer of keys, remotes, and warranties. Okay. At the walkthrough, whether I'm on the buyer's agent side or on the listing side, I always like at the walkthrough to ask the seller, hey, do you have any documentation for warranties for any of the appliances or anything in the home you're leaving behind? Where in the house are you leaving it? And see it there at the walkthrough. Then remotes. Maybe the seller's leaving you a remote for the front gate of the community or the gate of, or the remote for the garage door. The walkthrough is the time to say, where are you leaving those remotes and those warranties? You want to verify that you know where and how the buyer is always going to receive keys, remotes, and warranties, no matter which side of the transaction you're working. You want to know that ahead of time before the closing, before you show up at the title company. Obviously on closing day, you're going to congratulate your clients, no matter whether you're on the seller or buyer side, and definitely follow up post-closing. Follow up for holidays, for anniversaries. It does make a difference. Before the property's key exchange takes place, remember always to make note that everything that has been agreed upon in regards to repairs or modifications has been done. You want to double check that before you even go to closing. Let me see. What's the next slide not coming up? Oh, there we go. Common pitfalls to avoid. So definitely pitfalls to avoid. You definitely want to make sure that none of the deadlines are missed. As like I mentioned before, missing a deadline can lead to contract breach. So, for example, the finance contingency, which I can't state enough how important it is to protect the buyer side. You want to make sure when you're the buyer's agent that the buyer's lender has submitted the buyer's approval in time, whether it's the default 30 days or whatever you wrote in when you placed that offer. Very important. You do not want your buyer to be in breach of contract. On the seller side, your seller has to offer access to the buyer's property inspector and appraiser, because if not, they will be in breach of contract, and you don't want them to deal with that. So you need to keep everything in check, follow up on when the appraisal's taking place, the inspections, and everything else. You want to make sure you don't miss any deadlines. Lack of communication between parties is definitely a pitfall. Why? If the appraiser obviously calls the listing agent and schedules the appraisal, but the buyer's agent is contacting the listing agent asking, hey, has the appraiser contacted you? Has the appraiser contacted you? And the listing agent doesn't get back to the buyer's agent. How can that buyer's agent follow up with the lender on obtaining the appraisal report that you all need? He or she can't. So communication is key. Whether you're the buyer's agent or the listing agent, communication is key between all parties. Incomplete or incorrect contract documents, huge pitfall. God forbid there's a missing initial on one of your addendums or on one of the pages of the contract, and someone wants out of the transaction. They just have to hold on to that one missing initial or that one missing signature, and you're out of contract. So please make sure, double check the day you have that acceptance of the offer, okay? And of course, the most common pitfall is delays in financing or title issues. Title issues, definitely what we deal with the most is any open liens, open permits, things of that nature that take time to resolve, especially with HOAs, if there's a violation from the HOA. So definitely keep in contact with the title company, follow up. Hey, has a title commitment come in? And, if you keep in contact with everyone in the party, in the transaction, all the parties in the transaction, it does make a difference. You'll be informed and you'll be able to inform your client best, and you'll be able to guide your client on what to do and when. Okay. So now Kevin has a little
Cutting
quiz
off.
for us. Should I take questions first, Kevin, or you want to do the quiz
Yeah,
first?
let's address a few questions because there are some in the chat.
Okay.
So we'll start with those, and if anybody wants to come on camera, we can have you come on camera later. But we do have a little bit of a list. And to answer everyone's question, we will be sending you the recording of this class next week. And that'll include the slides, obviously. Okay, the first question is from Greg. Is it normal and customary that the listing agent contacts the buyer's lender or title company to track the process?
You know what? I don't think it's customary, but each home is different, each transaction is different. So it depends what's going on with the transaction. I believe you need to keep track of the transaction, whether you're on the listing side or the buyer's agent side. It's always worked for me. Now, for example, when you're on the listing side, you want to know when the appraiser is coming. So obviously, you want the appraisal done within the first 15 days of the contract, ideally. So if you're day 10 into the transaction, you haven't heard from that appraiser, I think that's a good reason to call the loan officer and ask, hey, I just want to confirm, has the appraisal been ordered? Ah, okay, I haven't received the call yet. Da, da, da. It's good. It's good to keep tabs. And as far as being the listing agent and talking to the lender, I know when I'm on the listing side, and I recommend it to everyone, when I receive that offer, I call the loan officer before presenting the offer to my seller. And I tell them, listen, eh, have you verified assets? If they didn't submit a DU approval, I ask for it. And I ask all the questions needed to make sure this is a solid buyer that can close. And then I go ahead and turn to my seller and say, I spoke to the loan officer, the buyer is well approved, or the buyer is approved but is pending this and this. So I think it's important to have contact with the loan officer, but just how much contact depends on the transaction and what's going on within it.
Awesome. Okay, next question. What happens if the buyer reviews the HOA rules and finds the restrictions unacceptable? Can the buyer cancel the contract?
What's the question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. What happens if the buyer reviews the HOA rules
Uh-huh.
and finds the restrictions unacceptable? Can the buyer cancel the contract?
Well, in the association, in the rider for the HOA association rider, you're gonna find that it says the buyer has a right to have a copy of the rules and regulations of the docs, and there's a timeline there of how long they have to review it. If you're within that timeline that's stated on the form, it depends what you wrote in. If you wrote in when at the time of offer 10 days, 7 days, whatever you wrote in. But if your buyer's within those days, yes, they can cancel for that reason. And obviously within the inspection period too. If you're within your inspection period, yes, you can also cancel, even if you left the addendum blank, which you shouldn't, because that's an extra protection for your buyer. But yes, definitely. That is grounds for cancellation.
Thank you, Marlene. Okay, next question is from Dot Vu. Normally, the buyer has the option to select the title company and to prepare documents for both parties. Do you recommend the listing agent to get a title company to do the closing documents on their behalf?
Me personally, yes, I have, for years, I have an attorney that I recommend to all my sellers. And for the most part, she has worked 95% of my sellers. She prepares the seller docs and she follows up on the transaction throughout. I see it this way. The title company that the buyer's agent wrote in on the offer, that's the title company selected by the buyer or the buyer's agent. So I always tell my seller, I think you have the same right since you're paying your side of title anyways. Instead of paying it to the title company the buyer selected, pay it to an attorney that you hired and is representing the transaction, but from your side of it, and it's going to keep you on track. And I have this attorney have direct contact with the seller. If an open permit or anything comes up, the attorney 9 times out of 10 handles it. I'm just informed of what's going on. So yeah, I do recommend doing that. Either having a title company handle it for you or an attorney.
Marlene, the next question is from Nicola, and they're curious to know if you can share the attorney contact.
Oh, definitely. Her name is Crystal Martin. Let me get her number. She's really good. Her number is 305-297-6832. She strictly does seller side, seller docs, but she's fabulous. Great with
I
follow-up.
guess it's only fair to ask who to use on the buyer side then.
Sunny Title.
There you go. Any other
They're
questions?
amazing.
Would you be able to repeat that phone number again, please?
Of course.
Thank you.
Crystal's phone number is 305-297-6832. That is her direct line, and she is actually the
Thank you.
attorney. She is actually the attorney on staff at Sunny Title.
And the title company is Sunny Title.
Yeah.
And you've used them for years, right, Marlene?
Oh yes, the owners, Douglas and Jennifer. Douglas has processed all my files for 15 years now,
Wow.
since the day I met them. Hmm.
Who knew teaching a class would help out a good friend?
I
Any
know.
other questions before we go?
What did you say, Kevin? The last part?
Oh, I said, who knew teaching a class could help an old friend, you know?
Yeah,
Girls and everything else. It's great.
definitely, definitely.
All right. Well, it appears that we are out of questions, and that means we are up for game time now. So I'm going to share the screen, and the winner will be eligible for a prize. All you got to do is stop by the office and say, "Hey, I won a quiz as part of the Realtor's Choice class series," and we'll hook you up with either a purse hanger or a money clip. All you got to do to
Ooh,
join, you guys should be able to see it, but all you got to do to join is to scan the QR code and enter the information on your phone. We'll give this about 2 minutes before we start with the quiz.
I'm so excited to see who is paying attention here. Who is taking good notes?
All right, we have 2 competitors. Are we going to have any more? Okay, we have a third. Oh, and it makes perfect
Ooh,
sense that we probably need your real name for you to get credit for the prize. All right, we're going to give it 15 more seconds. I love this. This is our biggest quiz for a class yet.
jump in, people.
12 players. Okay, final countdown, unless somebody needs more time. Oh, one dropped out. I waited too long. Okay, we're getting
Oh
started.
no.
All right, everybody, get ready. Name the one contingency that protects the buyer in a real estate contract. You answer on your phone.
You have to click on it on your phone, guys.
5 seconds left. Wow, not everybody got their answer in. That's surprising. All right, financing contingency is the correct answer.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. Well, wait, before we get to the next question, who is in the lead? Just to let you know, the correct answer gets you points, and how fast you answer the question also gets you points. So the faster you answer, the more points you get. Right now, John Paul's in the lead. Question 2. Why is the final walkthrough important? Get your answer in. All right, time's up. Answer: to ensure the property is in the agreed upon condition, sorry for the spelling, before closing. All right, let's see if we have a new leader. Ooh, John Paul falls off. And now, Verlandine, I think I said your name right. You're in the lead. Hope you hold on. Question 3. Why should you follow up with the title company in regards to the title commitment? All right, you guys all got it right. Now we will see if Verlandine was the fastest. She's holding on to her lead, it looks like. All right, 2 questions to go. Verlandine is in the lead. Next question. What is a common reason for delays in closing? All right. I'm glad people got this one for the majority right. The other answers are just kind of fun. All right. Okay. So Verlandine holding on to her lead. Final question. Will we have Verlandine as our winner today? We'll find out shortly. What should be verified before handing over the keys? All right. So great work, everybody. Verlandine, you are our winner. Congratulations.
Woot woot.
Do you have any you can pop on the screen if you want now and give an acceptance speech if you'd like. Okay, it looks like Verlandine is a humble person. We respect that. Well, congratulations, Verlandine. If you stop by the office, you can come by and ask for a purse hanger or a money clip. And
Do you have Verlandine's full name for?
no, just I think Verlandine is unique enough to where she's like, hey,
Yeah, okay.
I'm like, there's 5 other Verlandines that I can think of off the top of my head.
Stop.
Let's see if there's any other questions. Oh, people are answering in here. Oh, okay, everybody. Okay, well, hey, that's everything. Next week we start to go into our investor series. So if you know somebody who works with a lot of investors, or you have the ambitions to work with a lot of investors yourself, the next round of classes are for you. So next week we have Monte Granich and Kayla Revelis. We would totally love to see you there on the next Realtor's Choice class series. Until then, take care, everybody. So long, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Have a great day.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm gonna be on my laptop.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I have a full purse.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm eating before I leave.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm sneaking out for shopping.
We're YPN leaders.
Of course we're going to be creating content.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm signing up for classes.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm Cafecito obsessed.
I'm a YPN leader. Of course I'm gonna crash the next happy hour.
Yeah,